So I want you to picture this. It is a bitter, freezing Saturday night, right in that dead zone between Christmas and New Year's Eve.
Oh, that is the absolute worst time to be on the coast. Just freezing.
Exactly. And you are standing on the northern bluffs of Block Island, off the coast of Rhode Island. The wind is just howling. I mean, it is whipping freezing sea spray directly into your eyes.
Right. Visibility is probably zero.
Yeah, you're looking out at the freezing Atlantic, and the ocean is just this massive pitch black void. But then, cutting right through the darkness, you see something that, well, something impossible.
Okay. What is it?
It's a massive 18th century wooden merchant ship, and it is completely, utterly engulfed in roaring flames, like from the waterline all the way to the top of its mast.
Just a towering inferno on the water.
Right. But here is the truly terrifying part. It's sailing smoothly, directly into a howling headwind.
Oh, wow. That defies physics.
Completely. And as it glides past, cutting through those freezing black waves, drifting over the roar of the surf, you hear the faint, agonizing screams of a woman trapped in the fire.
God, that is an intensely haunting image. It's the kind of cinematic horror that feels like it belongs entirely in the realm of ghost stories or, a 19th century Gothic novel.
Yeah, it really does.
And for centuries, that is exactly how the legend of the Palatine Light has been passed down along the New England coast. I mean, locals have reported seeing this phantom burning ship off the shores of Rhode Island for hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years.
Yeah. But the deeply unsettling truth about this apparition is that it's not a work of fiction. It is the lingering echo of an actual historical atrocity.
And that is exactly the mission of today's deep dive. We are going to peel back the layers of one of America's most terrifying maritime legends.
Because beneath the ghost story, there is a real ship.
Right. Beneath the centuries of folklore, there is the agonizing, completely factual history of a real 300-ton British merchant vessel named the Princess Augusta.
A ship that met a truly gruesome end in December of 1738.
Yes. And to reconstruct this nightmare, we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of historical sources. We've got 18th century depositions taken under oath from the surviving crew members.
Which are incredible to read.
They really are. Plus, we have original 1739 newspaper clippings from the Boston Weekly Postboy and the Boston Evening Post.
We also looked at the geographical records of Block Island's treacherous shoals and, of course, centuries of both folklore and modern scientific analysis.
Because, the ocean is just this massive, unforgiving void. We love to tell stories about ancient sea monsters and supernatural curses.
Right, because those external fictional threats are, frankly, easier to process.
Exactly. But the truth is far more disturbing, because sometimes the absolute greatest horrors you can encounter at sea are born from a devastating combination of bad luck, the sheer brutality of the elements, and honestly, profound human cruelty.
Yeah, human cruelty plays a massive role here. To understand how a physical ship becomes a flaming phantom in local lore, we first have to understand the doomed origins of its final voyage.
Right, the genesis of a nightmare.
Exactly. We have to look at how the Princess Augusta essentially became a floating plague ship.
So let's look at the physical reality of the ship first. Based on the historical registry data, the Princess Augusta is a 300-ton wooden merchant ship. She hails from Ramsgate, England.
A pretty substantial vessel for the time.
Definitely. And in August of 1738, she leaves Rotterdam bound for Philadelphia. Though some of the people on board were hoping to eventually make their way to a German-owned settlement on the James River in Virginia.
But the cargo here is the crucial element.
Right, because she wasn't hauling textiles or spices or timber. She was hauling human lives.
The historical records indicate she was carrying roughly 340 to 400 immigrants.
That is a lot of people packed into a wooden ship.
It really is. And these were German Palatines. They were natives of the Palatinate region in the Holy Roman Empire. This was an area that had been repeatedly devastated by war, heavy taxation, brutal winters.
So they were desperate.
Very desperate. They were refugees fleeing their homeland, seeking religious freedom, and just a new start in the American colonies.
And it is because of these passengers that the ship was referred to in contemporaneous documents as the Palatine ship, which of course is where the eventual legend gets the name, the Palatine.
Right. And these were hopeful families. They liquidated everything they owned. They brought whatever wealth they had in gold and silver, and they packed themselves into the wooden hull of this vessel.
Which, even under the best conditions, is terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. A transatlantic crossing in the 18th century, even with the absolute best weather and leadership, was an arduous, highly dangerous undertaking.
Wait, I need to stop you there. Because the detail of how they provisioned the ship, that is where the nightmare actually
Oh, the
begins.
water casks, yeah.
Yeah. I read the 1739 reports, specifically the January 22nd edition of the Boston Evening Post, and it states that the fresh water they took on in Rotterdam was stored in old casks, casks that had previously held red and white wines.
It's just a catastrophic decision.
I mean, didn't anyone in 1738 realize that residual sugar and stagnant water is basically a bioreactor for disease?
Well, you have to remember that 18th century maritime logistics were often driven by aggressive cost-cutting. Purchasing brand new, properly sterilized water casks was expensive.
So they just reused the old wine barrels to save a buck.
Exactly. Reusing wine barrels was a cheaper alternative. The merchants provisioning the Princess Augusta likely assumed, a basic rinsing would suffice.
Oh, God.
But let's look at the actual biological mechanism of what happens when you do that. Wood is highly porous. The staves of those casks had absorbed the organic remnants, the yeast, the complex sugars of the wine.
So they're basically feeding whatever bacteria gets in there.
Yes, when you fill those barrels with river or well water in Rotterdam, seal them up and load them deep into the unventilated, dark, and increasingly warm hold of a ship in late August, you are creating the perfect incubation chamber for bacteria.
It's literally a ticking biological bomb.
It really is. Specifically, you are breeding the pathogens responsible for severe gastrointestinal diseases, like Shigella, which causes dysentery.
You read these survivor accounts and you realize they aren't just getting sick, they are experiencing absolute sensory deprivation and physiological breakdown.
The descriptions are just harrowing.
Let's paint the picture of what the hull of a 300-ton merchant ship looks like. It is incredibly cramped. You have 400 people packed into a space with virtually no natural light.
And zero air circulation.
Exactly. The ship is constantly pitching and rolling in the Atlantic swells. There are no modern plumbing facilities down there.
Just buckets, if they're lucky.
Right. And suddenly, this contaminated water supply unleashes what the historical records describe as a fever and flux.
Which is a polite way of saying bloody dysentery and typhus.
Yes. Sweeping through families who are packed shoulder to shoulder in the pitch black.
The physical reality of that environment is almost unimaginably horrific. I mean, dysentery causes severe inflammation of the intestines. It leads to rapid, catastrophic dehydration, extremely high fevers, and delirium.
Just constant agony.
And the disease spread through the tight, unventilated quarters of the Princess Augusta with absolute ferocity. Within weeks, the death toll became staggering.
Do we know the exact numbers?
Over the course of the voyage, 200 of the passengers died.
200?
Yes. Half of the entire immigrant population on board perished in sheer agony. And, the pathogens didn't discriminate.
Right, the crew was drinking the same water.
Exactly. The illness swept through the crew as well, killing roughly half of the seasoned sailors. And that included the ship's master, Captain George Long.
Okay, so think about the psychological horror of this. You're trapped in the dark with the mounting corpses of your family members, your friends, and the very sailors who are supposed to be navigating you to safety.
The mind fundamentally snaps before the body does in that scenario.
It has to. It's like a floating quarantine zone where the doors are locked from the outside by the ocean itself. What does that specific flavor of isolation do to a group of people?
It induces a level of psychological trauma that strips away all illusions of control. It strips away basic human dignity.
Because there's literally nowhere to run.
Nowhere. When Captain Long died of the flux, the Princess Augusta ceased to be a vessel of hope. It became a floating graveyard. The surviving Palatines were just watching their loved ones waste away in the shadows, suffering from severe dehydration, surrounded by the overwhelming stench of sickness and decomposition.
And without the captain, there is a massive power vacuum on this 300-ton ship. Someone has to take the wheel.
Right. The crisis had to shift. It moved from being a purely biological nightmare to a total breakdown of morality. Because the man who stepped into that vacuum didn't see a tragedy. He saw an economic opportunity.
This is where it gets so incredibly dark. With Captain Long dead, the first mate steps up to command. His name is Andrew Brooke.
Andrew Brooke, yeah.
Based on the historical depositions we have from the survivors, these are sworn statements taken by colonial authorities after the fact. Andrew Brooke is the absolute last person you want in charge during a crisis.
He was definitely not a savior.
Not at all. He doesn't step up to comfort the dying. He realizes he holds all the cards.
The depositions characterize Brooke as deeply opportunistic and exceptionally cruel. He was suddenly the master of a dying ship, responsible for hundreds of desperate, sick immigrants.
And he decides to exploit them.
Exactly. Rather than implementing strict rationing to ensure communal survival, he recognized the profound vulnerability of his passengers.
It's the perfect storm of a predatory leader and an impossible meteorological situation, because it's not just the disease anymore. The Princess Augusta sails right into the teeth of the North Atlantic winter.
The worst possible place to be.
They hit severe gales. The ship is pushed far, far to the north, completely blown off its intended route to the relatively warmer waters of Philadelphia.
They're completely lost.
Lost, and the wooden hull is taking a massive beating from the waves. The ship is leaking, and because the voyage has taken months longer than anticipated, their food stores are basically gone.
So now they are facing starvation on top of the epidemic.
Freezing, constantly wet from the freezing sea spray leaking through the warped deck boards, and dying.
And according to the survivor depositions, as starvation set in, Brooke realized he held a total monopoly on survival. He forced the desperate passengers to pay for the remaining rations.
Wait, he made them buy the food they already owned?
Yes. He demanded exorbitant prices for a single hardtack biscuit or just a tiny cup of untainted water.
Brooke's extortion worked like a medieval siege, but instead of surrounding a castle, he just starved them from the captain's quarters outward. He controlled the only key to the granary.
It was incredibly calculated.
But I have to push back on how he physically got away with this. There's still roughly 200 surviving passengers down there. Brooke and his remaining healthy crew are maybe, what, a half dozen guys?
A very small handful, yes.
How do they not just get violently overthrown by a mob of starving, desperate fathers and mothers? I mean, you'd think the parents would tear them apart.
That is a profound question of operational power dynamics. We have to look at the mechanics of an 18th century square-rigged ship.
Okay, break that down for us.
You are dealing with a 300-ton vessel powered entirely by wind. It requires a highly complex web of rigging, heavy canvas sails, and massive wooden yards.
It's not like steering a modern motorboat.
Not even close. It takes a coordinated team of highly skilled mariners to trim those sails, to navigate by the stars and a compass, and most importantly, to keep the ship from capsizing in a gale.
And the passengers didn't know how to do any of that.
Right. The Palatines were landlocked farmers and tradespeople from inland Germany. They were weak, ravaged by dysentery, grieving, and completely out of their element.
So even if they rushed Brooke and threw him overboard, they would essentially be sealing their own doom.
Precisely. If they overthrew the crew, it was a death sentence. They had absolutely no idea how to sail that massive ship through a lethal winter storm. Brooke knew his specialized maritime knowledge was the only thing keeping the wooden hull above water.
Wow. So he weaponized their dependency.
He did. The passengers were entirely at the mercy of their abuser because the dark, freezing Atlantic Ocean was a far more immediate, terrifying threat. So they handed over their life savings, their gold and silver, just to survive another day in the dark.
That is such a chilling realization. The man extorting your family's life savings is literally the only one who knows how to steer you out of the nightmare.
It's an impossible choice.
But the combination of a damaged, leaking ship, a depleted crew, and extreme winter gales meant that staying out at sea just wasn't sustainable. Landfall was inevitable.
It was just a matter of what they would hit.
Right. And when it finally happened, it wasn't a rescue. It was the climax of their nightmare.
Because the winter storms pushed them relentlessly toward the coast of Rhode Island, and specifically toward a geography that was renowned as a lethal maritime hazard, Block Island.
Yeah, if you look at the topographical charts of New Shoreham, you see exactly why this island was so feared. Block Island sits out in the water like a geographical snare.
It's surrounded by dangerous hidden shoals and submerged sandbars.
And its northernmost tip, Sandy Point, juts out into the ocean, specifically where ocean currents tend to push drifting vessels. It's like a trap.
Let's reconstruct the afternoon of December 26th or the 27th, depending on the source report. But we are in those bitter days immediately following Christmas, 1738.
Okay, set the scene.
It is 2 p.m., but it doesn't look like the afternoon, because a blinding, freezing snowstorm is raging across the water. Visibility is absolute zero.
Just a whiteout over the black water.
The wind is screaming through the rigging, completely overpowering any commands Brooke might be shouting. Below deck, the surviving Palatines are huddled in the freezing dark, listening to the massive oak timbers groan. And then the Princess Augusta strikes.
The historical record states they first struck a submerged shoal known as the hummock. Let's analyze the physics of that moment. You have a 300-ton wooden ship carrying immense momentum from the gale force winds, hitting a solid wall of sand and rock hidden just beneath the freezing waves.
The kinetic energy is devastating. It shatters the structural integrity of the oak hull instantly.
The ship grinds to a violent halt. The wood screams and fractures. It throws everyone below decks violently forward into the freezing bilge water.
But the ocean isn't done with them. The violent surf lifts the damaged, leaking vessel, drifts it off the shoal momentarily, only to violently throw to shore again.
Right, this time permanently. The ship grounds hard into Cow Cove on the northeast part of Block Island.
Put yourself in the hold of that ship, in that exact second. You have survived months of disease. You watched your family die. You have survived starvation and Brooks' extortion.
And now, in the pitch blackness of a blizzard, the ship violently shatters around you. Freezing ocean water begins pouring into the hold, rising rapidly.
The ship is groaning, threatening to tear itself to pieces with every single crashing wave.
You are screaming for the crew, for anyone to help get the heavy wooden hatches open so you can get to the upper deck. And then you realize the most horrifying truth of all.
The crew isn't coming.
This is the ultimate betrayal recorded in the sworn depositions. First Mate Brooke and his remaining able-bodied crew did not even attempt to organize an evacuation for the passengers.
They recognized the structural integrity of the ship was compromised beyond repair, so they deployed the lifeboats, lowered themselves into the freezing surf, and rowed to the safety of the shore.
They completely abandoned the traumatized, sick, and freezing immigrants on a shattered, sinking wreck in the middle of a blinding blizzard.
They essentially locked them in a freezing, flooding wooden box to die.
The passengers just had to sit there in the dark, shivering, listening to the storm, waiting for the wood to splinter and the freezing water to swallow them. But incredibly, the ship holds together through the night.
A miracle of 18th century shipbuilding, really.
Yeah. Dawn breaks on the shattered Princess Augusta. As the sun comes up, the surviving passengers look out and see the shoreline, and they see the Block Islanders gathering on the beach.
Which introduces a massive historical mystery. Because were these locals coming as saviors, or were they coming as scavengers?
That is the pivotal question that deeply divides the historical narrative. Let's establish the agreed-upon facts first. The Islanders saw the wreck on the morning of the 27th or 28th.
And according to the island's own historical records, the locals actually had to convince Brooke, who, remember, was safely standing on the beach, to allow the passengers off the ship.
Wait, he didn't even want to let them off.
Apparently not. But the Islanders facilitated getting the survivors out of the shattered hull and onto the sand.
But out of the original nearly 400 passengers who left Rotterdam, only about 90 to 105 made it to the freezing shore of Block Island alive.
It's a staggering loss of life.
And tragically, the exposure to the blizzard, combined with the lingering typhus and dysentery, meant that 20 more of them died shortly after on the island.
But the narrative of a heroic rescue gets very, very murky when we look at the financial aftermath. Because it wasn't just about the people on the ship, it was about the cargo.
I want to look at the 1739 newspaper reports because they absolutely blow this story wide open. A report from the Boston Weekly Postboy, published on January 15th, 1739, reads, quote, "In short, tongue and pen cannot relate the present circumstances of the poor Palatines, whose number is said to be only 85 persons," end quote.
And the reason their circumstances were so dire wasn't just the shipwreck, it's because they were systematically robbed.
The Boston Weekly Postboy report provides critical context here. It states that the ship was, quote, "very rich, reckoned to be worth 20,000 pounds sterling."
To put that in perspective, 20,000 pounds in 1738 was an astronomical fortune.
It's basically lottery money today.
Right. This was the combined liquidated life savings of all the Palatine families. We're talking heavy chests of gold, silver, and valuable goods they were bringing to purchase land and start their new lives.
The report notes that after the ship broke to pieces, an abundance of these goods washed ashore. But the article explicitly states that the passengers were subjected to extortion and clandestine actions by the locals.
It alleges the Palatines couldn't get their own family heirlooms or gold back without paying exorbitant salvage fees, sometimes up to a third of the value.
And that great quantities of their silver were essentially confiscated by the islanders managing the wreck.
This wasn't just a rumor either. This was a massive scandal that triggered a high-level government response. The January 22nd edition of the Boston Evening Post notes that Governor John Wanton of Rhode Island was directly informed of the looting allegations.
So the governor gets involved.
Yes. He dispatched a magistrate, Peter Boris Esquire, along with heavily armed officers, to go to Block Island. Their specific orders were to investigate the tragedy and, quote, see how matters are that those poor people may have justice done them.
The deportment of a magistrate indicates that mainland authorities suspected severe foul play. We have to examine the mechanics of 18th century salvage laws, though.
Oh, the salvage laws were incredibly problematic.
Right. The line between a legitimate, legal salvage operation and outright predatory looting was incredibly thin. When a ship wrecked on your coast, maritime law often allowed locals to claim a percentage of the cargo as a reward for the dangerous work of recovering it from the surf.
But the Boston report suggests the surviving Palatines were actively exploited. I mean, they survived the agonizing dysentery, they survived Brooks' extortion, they survived the blizzard, only to have their remaining life savings stripped from them on the freezing beach under the guise of legal salvage fees.
But let's analyze the sociology of this moment, though. I want to look at it from the perspective of the islanders for a second. Think about the extreme isolation of Block Island in the winter of 1738.
It would have been incredibly bleak.
Exactly. You have a tiny, highly impoverished, weather-beaten community suddenly faced with 90 starving, diseased immigrants landing on their beach. They have to feed them, house them, and risk catching their diseases.
Diseases that were highly contagious and lethal.
Right. And simultaneously, the beach is suddenly littered with 20,000 pounds in gold and silver. It is a massive windfall for a community that struggles to just survive the winter. Does extreme isolation create an environment where basic survival and opportunism trump morality?
It absolutely does. And the islanders vehemently maintained that they made a valiant, selfless effort to save the crew and passengers. They pointed to the undeniable fact that they took the infectious survivors into their own homes, nursed them, and spent days burying the dead in the frozen ground.
Which is true, they did do that.
Yes. But the immense wealth that vanished into the pockets of the locals, coupled with the infuriating fact that the surviving crew, including Andrew Brooke, curiously faced no official criminal charges for mutiny or abandonment.
Which is wild to me.
Right. All of that created a massive vacuum of truth and justice.
And the enduring takeaway here isn't just that the ocean is dangerous, it's that the human brain cannot tolerate a vacuum of justice, especially surrounding a senseless tragedy.
We need someone to blame.
We really do. We would rather invent a grand, sinister conspiracy than accept the terrifying reality that 200 people can die simply because someone didn't clean a wine barrel, and the survivors can be legally extorted because of a loophole in maritime salvage law.
Because the wealth vanished and no one was hanged, the mainlanders filled that vacuum with a nightmare narrative. Within a year, they pointed the finger at the Block Islanders and accused them of being wreckers.
Now, the concept of wreckers is one of the most predatory, terrifying elements of maritime history and folklore. A wrecker wasn't just a scavenger. They were murderers who intentionally caused shipwrecks for profit.
And the rumor that rapidly spread across the New England mainland was that the Block Islanders had tied lanterns to the necks of horses and walked them along the treacherous, elevated bluffs of Sandy Point during the storm.
Let's explain how that deception actually works, because it's diabolical.
It really is. From out at sea in the middle of a blizzard, a ship's navigator is desperately looking for a safe harbor. They see a light bobbing up and down in the distance.
And the motion of a lantern on a walking horse mimics the gentle pitching of another ship safely anchored in deep water.
Exactly. The accusation was that the islanders intentionally lured the desperate, blinded Princess Augusta away from safe water and directly into the lethal shoals.
They wanted to smash the ship to pieces, specifically so they could murder the weakened survivors and steal the 20,000 pounds sterling.
It transforms a story of natural tragedy and opportunistic greed into a story of premeditated mass murder. And the legend goes even further to explain why there was no physical evidence of the ship left in Cow Cove.
Right, because there was no wreck left on the beach.
Exactly. To cover up their heinous crimes, the wreckers supposedly set the shattered hull on fire and pushed it back out to sea. Now let's look at the historical reality of that scuttling.
Because burning ships was actually pretty common, right?
Yes. Official sources suggest that the ship was likely deemed entirely unsalvageable after being battered on the rocks. It was standard practical maritime procedure to set a ruined wreck on fire and let the tide carry it out.
Because you have to clear the hazard from the cove so other ships wouldn't hit the submerged timbers.
Exactly. But folklore twists this practical act of coastal management into an act of murderous concealment.
And that sinister twist brings us to the most emotionally devastating, visceral element of the entire legend, the story of Mary Vanderline.
Oh, this part is incredibly hard to hear.
It is. Amid the absolute chaos of the wreck, the freezing water, the abandonment by the crew, and the alleged looting on the beach, the story states that one passenger was driven completely, irreparably mad.
She had lost her family to disease. She had lost her wealth to the crew. Her mind finally snapped.
Both the defensive Islander accounts and the accusatory mainland legends actually agree on this one horrific detail. A female passenger, widely identified in lore as Mary Vanderline, refused to leave the ship.
Clinging to whatever few sodden belongings she had left, she retreated deep into the dark, freezing hull of the shattered Princess Augusta.
And whether it was intentional, premeditated murder by a town of wreckers or just a horrific, negligent oversight by a crew trying to clear a wrecked hull, she was forgotten.
When the ship was pushed out into the freezing Atlantic swells and set ablaze, she was still trapped in the belly of the ship.
She burned alive as the vessel drifted out to sea.
And those who claim to witness the ghost ship's reappearances always mention that her agonizing screams are the auditory hallmark of the apparition. Her terror was profound.
The trauma of the event, the sheer concentration of human suffering on that one stretch of sand, scarred the local psyche so deeply that the Princess Augusta refused to stay at the bottom of the ocean.
The physical wood and canvas burned and sank in late December of 1738, leaving no physical wreckage behind. But the psychological trauma birthed the phenomenon we opened with, the Palatine Light.
For centuries, specifically between Christmas and New Year's Eve, which is the exact anniversary of the disaster, locals have reported seeing this ghostly burning ship off the coast.
And it's not just a fuzzy, indistinct glow in the fog.
No, eyewitnesses describe seeing the intricate details, the masts, the complex square rigging, the distinct outline of an 18th century merchant vessel completely engulfed in roaring flame.
It became known as a harbinger of disaster. If you saw the Palatine Light from the bluffs, a terrible storm, a shipwreck, or a local tragedy was sure to follow.
And the most eerie, consistent detail in these reports. If an intrepid local tried to launch a boat and sail toward the light to investigate or to offer help, the burning ship would continually move further away,
maintaining its distance until it simply vanished into the dark.
As researchers looking at an extensive stack of modern scientific analysis, we have to examine the physical mechanisms behind sightings like this that persist over hundreds of years.
The most compelling scientific explanation is the Fata Morgana mirage,
which is fascinating. Explain how that works.
It's a highly complex optical phenomenon caused by a severe atmospheric temperature inversion. Normally, air gets colder the higher you go, but in a temperature inversion, a layer of unusually warm air rests over a layer of freezing cold air.
Which is a condition incredibly common over the freezing Atlantic Ocean in winter.
Exactly. Now, light bends when it passes through air layers of different temperatures and densities. So if there is a physical object far over the horizon, like a modern cargo ship, or even the intense beam of a distant lighthouse, the light from that object hits the inversion layer.
And it gets refracted.
Yes, violently refracted or bent downward toward the observer on the shore.
So the observer is essentially seeing a projection of something that is physically located beyond the curvature of the Earth.
Right. It projects a highly distorted, hovering, often inverted image into the sky above the horizon. Because the atmospheric layers are constantly shifting and undulating with the wind, the refracted image shimmers and dances.
And to the human eye, standing in the freezing dark, that shimmering, vertically stretched distortion of light can very easily look like towering flames licking up the masts of a ship.
There's also the theory of bioluminescent swamp gas. The decomposition of organic matter under the water or in the marshy areas of the island can release pockets of methane.
And when these gases bubble to the surface, they can occasionally ignite or at least glow intensely due to phosphorescence.
But honestly, while the optical physics of Fata Morgana and the chemistry of methane are fascinating, they completely miss the point. The science doesn't write poetry.
No, it doesn't.
And the science certainly doesn't explain the screams.
It was actually a poet who truly immortalized the horror of this event. In 1867, John Greenleaf Whittier published his famous poem, The Palatine.
He based his work heavily on the dark folklore he heard from mainland Newport residents, and he fully embraced the malicious wrecker version of the story.
Whittier's poem cemented the narrative in the American consciousness. It ensured that the ship would forever be remembered not by its real name, the Princess Augusta, but as the Palatine.
A victim of calculated human malice rather than just maritime misfortune and disease.
And that cultural impact has endured all the way into the 21st century. I mean, look at the 2020 horror film, The Block Island Sound. The film weaves the legend of the Palatine into its plot, interpreting the wreck and the bizarre behavior of the crew as the result of an ancient, terrifying sea monster parasite infecting them from the deep ocean.
We are still, hundreds of years later, trying to invent monsters to explain the sheer horror of what happened in that water.
Yet, amidst all the poetry, the horror movies, and the ghost stories, there is a solemn, incredibly grounding reality to this entire deep dive.
A physical reminder.
Yes, if you travel to Block Island today, near the Mohegan Bluffs, in a quiet, windswept field, there is a physical marker. It was placed there by the Block Island Historical Society in 1947.
And the stone simply reads, Palatine Graves, 1738.
The physical wood of the ship is gone. The 20,000 pounds sterling evaporated into history. But the bodies of the Palatines, the families who survived the agonizing dysentery, the extortion in the dark and the freezing ocean, only to die on the freezing sand, they remain buried right there beneath the island's soil.
Which brings us back to the true horror of this story.
The terror of the Princess Augusta isn't about a flaming ghost ship or even the myth of murderous wreckers. It is a sobering, terrifying reminder of extreme human vulnerability.
It is about a group of hopeful families who are locked in a dark, pitching wooden box. They endured virulent disease, starvation, freezing gales, and a cruel commander who monetized their suffering.
And the few who survived all of that were simply shattered against a frozen coast, stripped of their futures, and buried in unmarked graves.
It is a profound tragedy that completely strips away the romanticism we often attach to the Age of Sail. It highlights the brutal intersection of natural indifference and human opportunism.
So, the next time you look out at the ocean, remember that it looks peaceful from the shore. It looks like a beautiful, unbroken horizon. But beneath the surface, it hides the remnants of thousands of desperate, horrific final moments.
Decisions made in the freezing dark.
Screams swallowed entirely by the wind, and fortunes and futures lost forever to the abyss.
We use folklore as a shield against that exact realization. We tell ourselves ghost stories so we don't have to face the terrifying reality of how fragile we are when the water starts rising.
I want to leave you with a lingering, unsettling question to mull over tonight. If the Palatine Light is merely a scientific mirage, if it's just a modern cargo ship refracted through the cold winter air, or just glowing marsh gas, why does it always consistently look like an 18th century merchant vessel?
And why does it only ever appear on fire?
Think about what kind of energy an event that traumatic leaves behind. Think about what an agonizing scream frozen in time might actually look like when it finally catches the light on a lonely stretch of coast.